Mary Margaret Kilmeyer, and I will be moderating today's webinar. I am the Patient Resource Manager for Debbie's Dream Foundation Curing Stomach Cancer. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist and recently completed my doctorate. My clinical and research background is focused on working collaboratively with doctors, patients, their families, and members of a healthcare team. We would like to thank Genentech for providing funding to make this webinar possible. We would also like to thank our promotional partners, the American Association for Cancer Research, the Anti-Cancer Club, Your Magazine, the Esophageal Cancer Action Network, Meals to Heal, and Patient Resource. You will be able to ask questions during this presentation. You can type your question into the white text box that appears on your screen. In addition, the recording of this webinar will be accessible on our website in approximately 1 week. I will introduce you to Debbie Zellman, who will share with you her journey and information about Debbie's Dream Foundation, and then our patient panel will address the role of nutrition for cancer patients. Today's webinar will be an open forum discussion, and you're encouraged to send in your questions for our patients to address. I would now like to introduce the president and founder of Debbie's Dream Foundation, Debbie Zellman.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Really excited for today's webinar. As president and founder of Debbie's Dream Foundation Curing Stomach Cancer, I'm excited to be here with you today. I was diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer in April of 2008. At the time, I was only 40 years old, the mother of 3 young children, married to a physician, and I was a practicing attorney with my own firm. I really had no risk factors for stomach cancer, and my symptoms were very vague. My chances of being alive in 5 years was only 4%. However, it has now been over 7 years. But I do like to remind people that I've had 5 recurrences over those 7 years, and that I am still a patient. Next slide. A year after I was diagnosed, which was April of 2009, is when I founded Debbie's Dream Foundation Curing Stomach Cancer, which we call DDF sometimes. And I'm proud to tell you that DDF and I are now members of many groups that bring awareness and raise the profile for stomach cancer, including the Deadliest Cancers Coalition, the Patient Equal Access Coalition, and the State Patient Equal Access Coalition, One Voice Against Cancer as well. I'm also a patient advocate for the National Cancer Institute's Esophagogastric Task Force. I'm also on the Patient Advocacy Steering Committee. In addition, I'm on the NCCN Gastric and Esophageal Guidelines Committee. I'm on the CDMRP Department of Defense Peer Review Cancer Research Program Integration Panel, the American Society of Clinical Oncology HER2 Testing in Gastric Cancer Project, and I am a stakeholder for the American Cancer Society Research Program. However, I'm told that most notably, I appeared on the Dr. Oz show in a program about stomach cancer. Next slide. Here are some facts about stomach cancer that you all may not know. Stomach cancer is one of the leading causes of cancer death worldwide, second in men and fourth in women. Most people are very surprised to hear that because most people have not heard about stomach cancer before they're diagnosed. Nearly 1 million people worldwide are diagnosed, and approximately 700,000 will die. More than 24,000 Americans will be diagnosed with stomach cancer each year, and more than 11,000 will die that year. Stomach cancer is on the rise in young people, ages 25 to 39. However, per cancer death, stomach cancer receives the least amount of federal research funds of any cancer. There are few resources and support services for stomach cancer patients, and most people know very little about this deadly disease. Next slide. And that's why Debbie's Dream Foundation now is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We were the first nonprofit organization in the U.S. dedicated to raising awareness about stomach cancer, advancing funding for research, and providing education and support internationally to patients, families, and caregivers. And our ultimate goal is to make the cure for stomach cancer a reality. Our website is debbiesdream.org. Next slide. And I'm proud to tell you that as an organization, we have reached many milestones, one of which is our patient resource education program that we call PrEP, which prepares hundreds of patients, families, and caregivers around the world by matching them with other stomach cancer survivors and caregivers, and it uses very specific disease criteria. First and foremost, stage. Second would be biomarkers, and other criteria might be age, gender, region, and role, meaning a survivor with another survivor or a caregiver with another caregiver. We also have other milestones, including we offer free symposium each year across the country, as well as webinars like this one. And all educational events that we offer are free. We have 27 chapters, which are in the U.S., Canada, and Germany. We also have chapters forming every week is a new chapter pretty much. So if you're interested in starting a chapter, please connect with us. Our contact information will be given during the webcast. We have events all over the U.S. So again, get involved, attend, or start your own event. We've actually given $300,000 in research grant funding. So we're very proud of that. We've also held a Stomach Cancer Advocacy Day. I think we've had 3, with our 4th one coming up in February, and we held the first ever Stomach Cancer Capitol Hill briefing. These are very important events, and I'm happy to tell you that as a direct result of the advocacy of Debbie's Dream Foundation, we had stomach cancer included in a $50 million pot of money that is through the Department of Defense peer-reviewed cancer research program. And that money gets given to 11 cancers, one of which is now stomach cancer. In addition, our website is amazing. It contains in-depth information about stomach cancer, including a lecture library on almost any topic you could want to hear for stomach cancer. We have clinical trials information and a matching service, all free. We have the most amazing stomach cancer support community, again free, and something that is a unique, one-of-a-kind support community. We have a blog and many, many resources, and our website is completely translatable into more than 60 languages. Again, the website is debbiesdream.org. Next slide. So this is a quick little snapshot of our homepage of our website, and you can see it's really user-friendly. There's lots of little buttons. That's just the very top. You can scroll down as well on the website for some more information, but it's pretty easy, pretty easily navigable, and we want everyone to go on there and utilize our free resources. Next slide. Okay, and so now I'm going to turn this webinar back over to our moderator, Mary Margaret Kilmeyer. But before I do, I want to just tell you that this webinar is going to be really terrific. We have 2 wonderful panel members, patients, who will be terrific, and a really great opportunity for everyone who's listening in to ask their questions. So thank you very much, and back to you, Mary Margaret.
Thank you so much, Debbie. As everyone can see on your screens now, we have many events for you to get involved in throughout the year across the country. Coming up in September, our Dream Big Luncheon will be taking place in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Also in September, we will have a team participating in the 19th Annual Chicago Half Marathon and 5K. And then also in Chicago, but in November, on November 7th, we will be hosting an educational symposium that is free for stomach cancer patients, their caregivers, and family members. If you're not able to make it to the Chicago area on November 7th, that will also be live webcast internationally for anyone to log in and view and watch the presentations, as well as participate by sending in your questions and comments throughout the symposium. On November 13th is the International Stomach Cancer Genes Day, and we encourage everyone to participate in that. And you can learn more about that on our website under the events. And then in January of 2016, we will have a team participating in the Miami Marathon and Half Marathon. For information about these and more events that are taking place, please visit our events page off of www.debbiesdream.org. Debbie's Dream Foundation is headquartered in Davie, Florida. Our office is open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. And on this slide, you will see important phone numbers and contact information for our office. And we will be starting the panel discussion on the role of nutrition for the cancer patient. Our presenters are Pat Campola and Nelson Civello. Pat and Nelson are both stage 2 stomach cancer survivors. They are active in W Foundation, volunteering as mentors for stomach cancer patients through the Patient Resource and Education Program. They have also presented on the patient panel of our annual symposium, offering their perspective and views on treatment issues and the patient perspective. They also volunteer and participate on committees for the organization, and we're very pleased to have them join us today. And I would now like to begin our panel discussion. Please send in your questions for Pat and Nelson at this time. And Pat and Nelson, I want to just make sure we can hear you both.
Can you hear me? This is Pat. Okay.
Hi, Pat.
I'm present and accounted for.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And while we're waiting for our first questions, Pat and Nelson, would you mind giving us a brief introduction of yourself, your diagnosis, and your current status?
Pat, I'll defer to you since you went first.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pat Campola. I'm 66 years old, and I was diagnosed with stomach cancer in September. It'll be 3 years this September I was diagnosed. Total surprise, no symptoms, and I guess that's the good news because the disease had not progressed beyond stage 2 after biopsy and assessment. And it was recommended that the tumor, which was in the esophageal part of my stomach, the upper part of my stomach, was surgically removed, achieving good margins, which is what surgeons strive for, meaning no tumor was left behind or part of it. And then, unfortunately, I had some involvement with my lymph nodes, and the protocol at the time, I guess it's still at the time, when you do have lymph node involvement, there is a recommendation of chemotherapy and radiation. So over the next couple of months, I went through that process and experienced some, but certainly not major side effects of the treatment. Lost a lot of weight, as would be expected. And then once that was over, it has been a continual improvement over a year and a half period to get back to where I thought I was experiencing my usual day-to-day enjoyment and activity. So fortunately, thus far, I have not had any reoccurrence. I get a PET scan or CAT scan every 6 months. I'm not crazy about that. It's high anxiety time, and there have been scares, but fortunately, none have turned out to be anything to worry about with regard to recurrence. So I will, defer to Nelson at this point. I'm happy to answer questions about the nutrition or any side effect issues that I may have had.
Someone answering that phone? Okay.
It's my fax machine, and I apologize.
Oh, okay, Pat. Hello, my name is Nelson Civello, and my story is very similar to Pat, except that I was diagnosed a year later in 2013. After I had gallbladder surgery, my symptoms were very similar to gallstones. The cramping and the distension of the stomach and the difficulty eating more than you normally would, or less than you normally would. And so I was diagnosed, and turned out that my type of cancer was a rare one. It was called Liditis plastica, which covered 60% of my stomach, thereby giving me the treatment plan of chemo, surgery, chemo, which is kind of the standard of care for a discovery like that. And so I did 10 weeks of chemo, Prior to the surgery, I had all the side effects that are attendant to chemo, which I'm happy to talk about, including the nutritional aspects of that in a couple minutes. Then I had a full gastrectomy at Sloan Kettering, after which I had complications where my entire stomach had been removed, but the esophageal junction that was rebuilt closed up, and I wasn't able to swallow. So for the next 12 months, really, I was on the table about every 2 to 4 weeks, having my esophagus stretched under full anesthesia. So that wasn't fun. But because of that, I was not able to have the post-surgical chemo, and it turns out that so far it has not hurt me, because I've had 3 CAT scans, as Pat mentioned, since. Not a lot of fun, but every 6 months, and so far there is no evidence of disease. So I'm happy to say that I seem to be on the right track after all the complications. There were some other minor complications we could talk about, but I know the topic today is nutrition, and I wanted to volunteer that during my recovery period, for about a 6-month period, I did keep a spreadsheet of what I ate, and I use that now when I mentor other cancer patients, because I quite frankly thought the nutritional advice that we were getting from the professionals was really rather weak. They certainly didn't understand. They may have understood nutrition, but they didn't understand nutrition necessarily for somebody that no longer possessed a stomach. And as you know, your stomach has 2 main functions. It's a grinder and a storage tank. It's your blender. And without that blender, there's just a lot of things that you can't process. And you certainly don't have the storage to eat very much. So you have to learn how to eat in small quantities, eat slowly, chew extremely well, and change your diet. So those are all adjustments that both Pat and I'm sure Pat would agree, we're willing to make to be known as survivors, and we're both survivors and proud to be that. So I look forward to answering any of your questions today about nutrition or anything else regarding the disease that I can help with. Mary Margaret?
Thank you so much, both of you, for that introduction and background into your personal history. The first question that has come in is, what was the most difficult nutritional battle for you?
Well, this is Pat, and I think the sugar seemed to have the first rejection of my body. Anything with sugar seemed to be a very difficult digestion process. And if you look at the foods along the lines of the starches, seem to take quite a bit of time to digest versus the proteins. So I would opt for softer foods. I didn't care for the Boost or the drinks of that nature. That didn't seem to help. McDonald's milkshakes were pretty good, but you had to watch how much of that you could take because of the sugar. So it was a slow process of trial and error, starting with the softer foods, and then working my way up to more substance in the foods themselves. And right now, I can say that I can pretty much eat anything, in a low volume capacity. And like Nelson said, many small meals, I prefer that. Also, half of my stomach was removed, and the valve that opens and closes the esophagus to the stomach was also removed. So that left me susceptible to acid reflux. And how I deal with that is I sleep elevated at night so that gravity is working for me, as opposed to laying flat on a bed and having acid regurgitate back into your esophagus. It happens, and when it happens, it's very painful. It's actually a burning sensation that I deal with. But fortunately, I'm fairly careful as to what I eat at night, how I sleep at night, and I would say for the most part it's under control.
Pat, you really stole my thunder. So much of what you said is very similar in my case. I will reemphasize that I, too, did not like the Boost and Ensure. It actually made me sick. It's heavily, because of the high caloric content of those health drinks, they're heavily involved with sugar. And if you've read about stomach cancer and gastrectomy on the website, any website, one of the first symptoms that we'll talk about is the dumping syndrome, and that is generally caused by sugar. And even if it doesn't go as far as dumping syndrome, the sugar can actually cramp you up. Remember that your food is going directly to the small intestine now, and the small intestine just gets overwhelmed by the amount of sugar, and it just can't handle it. So you pay the price for that. I had the same problem with even with ice cream. As much as I loved it, and it went down easily, and it was refreshing. If I had too much ice cream, I would pay the price, even if it was soft serve kind of ice cream. So I learned to live with protein shakes, and again, because of my aversion to sugar, at least the chocolate and vanilla and caramel type sweets, the real heavy sweets, instead we would use a blender, one of those fast blenders called the Bullet, and we would blend up. We'd take protein powder, we'd take maybe almond milk, we'd take some yogurt and some frozen fruits like strawberries. We'd freeze our own bananas, and I'd have one or two of those a day, and they were loaded with protein and with calories because, as Pat said, there's a tremendous amount of weight loss that's involved here. I lost at the outset 7 pounds, and I couldn't put it back on for. I didn't start regaining because of my complication for a good year. Now I'm happy to say I'm almost 2 years out, and I've regained about 45 of those 70 pounds, and I don't need to get the last 25. So I'm happy where I'm at right now.
Well, I'd like to add one other thing that I think I've heard other stomach cancer, esophageal cancer patients express. I experienced what I called excessive saliva. And that's, for whatever reason, my mouth would fill up with saliva, and I had no idea what was happening. And when I mentioned this to my oncologist, he kind of shrugged his shoulders as though he had never heard of it. I went on the various websites. The Mayo Clinic did address it somewhat, said, it is a condition, not quite sure how it happens. But in my mentoring with W's Dream Foundation and talking to other survivors and caretakers, I find that it's a common event, that there were 2 or 3 people I've talked to in the last couple of years that experienced excessive saliva, even more so. The one thing I can say for me is that it dissipated. Okay, it was frequent early on, but now it's a very rare occasion. But it is something that I could never figure out what sparked it or what stopped it. But fortunately, it's lesser of an issue now.
You know, Pat, I'll just jump in on that. I had a similar experience and did some research because my esophageal junction was closing up. I had trouble swallowing, needless to say, and when a piece of food would get stuck in the esophagus, that excessive saliva would flow to the esophagus. I later learned that is called brash, and brash, that excessive saliva, is a way that the body reacts to try to help the esophagus swallow and to also to alleviate any burning sensations from any sores or fissures that develop in the esophagus. So it actually is a natural process that your body goes to help resolve choking. Unfortunately, it made matters worse because if you're blocked, that excessive saliva just tends to build up in the esophagus all the way back into your throat, which is like any plumbing that gets backed up. you don't put more water on in a blocked plumbing pipe. So that's kind of what happened. But as it did in Pat's case, that eventually resolved itself as my esophagus was reopened.
Thank you both so much for that. Another question that's come in, you both have referenced weight loss. Can you talk about what the weight loss was like for you and how you went about gaining that weight back?
Well, maybe I'll start this time. This is Nelson. I'm the one that lost 70 pounds, and I've had good luck getting it back, although it has taken me, frankly, the better part of 2 years to get back to this. But I thought it was helpful. You know, the nutritionist, when I went to visit my surgeon and my oncologist, I asked for a nutritionist. So number one, I had to ask, which I thought was not right, but I got one to show up at one of my appointments, and basically she came into the room and said that I needed to consume 2,300 calories a day, and if I did that, I would start gaining weight. At least, maintenance was just below 2,300. I said, well, that's a great theory, but number one, I don't have a stomach, and number two, my esophagus is blocked. So you tell me how to consume 2,300 calories a day. And she gave me a couple of ideas, but frankly, my wife and I did our own research, and we came up with a meal plan. You have to eat frequently, small amounts, and you're trying to get as many calories as you can. So I mentioned earlier the protein shakes, at least one a day. And I thought what I would do is I kept a spreadsheet for 6 months. So I literally have my meal plan every day for 6 months, and I thought I would just read you one day at the very beginning of this 6-month period, which was less than a month after my surgery, and then another day 6 months later, so you could see how the day changed. So let me start with a day called October 23rd, 2013. I started my morning with instant breakfast, Carnation instant breakfast, which I found more palatable than Booster and Ensure because it wasn't as sweet, and it had, it was like eating oat bran, and it had quite a bit of calorie in it. Then my second meal, about 2 hours later, was cheese and broccoli soup, which had been put through the blender so that it was completely pureed. And then a couple hours after that, I would have, I had a popsicle, which was something I became very fond of. They're fruit popsicles, and so they have some calories in them, and they're cold. Then I had a 3/4 drink of Boost, even though I didn't like it. That was 275 calories there. Then a mango smoothie. And then I finished off meal number 7 of the day with some more potato puree soup. So that kind of a diet in the beginning was maintaining my weight. By the end of the 6 months, so we're just going to fast forward here 6 months, and I'm just going to give you another typical day, and you can see how it changed. I would start out my breakfast, this time with oat bran, and the oat bran, needless to say, was loaded with butter and maple syrup and bananas. And then I would have 2 hours later some scrambled eggs, and if possible, some cheese for protein. And then my next meal was pasta vajol, which is pasta and beans, and it's pretty easy to swallow. Then I had some snacks in the afternoon, usually something like cashews, which are very soft and easy to chew. Then I had some next meal matzo ball soup. Then in the afternoon, I had some popcorn, which I found luckily easy to eat. And then I finished off that evening with a small amount of ice cream. So you could see that over the 6 months, and during that time frame, my weight went from about 150 to about 160. So I was able to gain 10 pounds during the toughest period when I was going through these, constant dilations on my esophagus and still recovering from the chemo and the surgery. So I thought that was a victory, being able to gain 10 pounds when other people, were continuing to lose.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Nelson, I'm curious, did you use your tracking system to look at any side effects or, food intolerances or issues that you might have had as well?
I didn't record them, but I certainly could look back. For example, if I didn't feel good on a Tuesday, I'd look back and see what I ate Sunday and Monday, and sometimes I could find a culprit. Like I might have had back-to-back sweets or something like that, which might have affected me that night.
Okay.
But I didn't keep a log, though, on my troubles.
Okay. Thank you so much. Pat, the same question for you. If you had what your issues with weight loss were, and if you gained weight back, how did you go about doing that?
Okay, sure. I had lost about 60 pounds at the low point of weight loss, and my weight gain was gradual over probably a 2-year period. Initially, I was concerned that I didn't seem to be gaining any weight to speak of, and that affects your energy level, etc. But fortunately, I had some stomach left, and when you have some stomach left over time, that stretches out and gives you more capacity. Such as people who do bypass surgery for weight loss, and they could actually gain their weight all back if they don't maintain good nutrition habits. So again, I was lucky in that I was able to use some of my stomach to retain more and more food over time, and it came back pretty gradually. But it has now stabilized. I'm at a good weight. I lost 60, gained back 20. I'm 5'10", 5'11", roughly 180 pounds now, and it seems to be a good weight for me. So now I maintain my current foods. I don't experiment a lot, and I'd be a cheap date, I guess you would call me. If you took me to a restaurant, I probably would order half of what anybody else would, and then take half of that home. So that's how I did it, and I think as your body repairs itself from the chemo and the radiation, your appetite comes back, and then weight gain will follow. And I think it's extremely important. When I go to my oncologist, he's not concerned about my weight gain. He's concerned about my weight loss, and if that's happening, what's driving that? Especially if I'm not on a diet or trying to lose weight. That's my story.
Pat, let me jump in again. This is Nelson. I had great doctors and great medical care all throughout my 2-year battle. But again, in the nutritional area, I think even the doctors are relatively naive. For example, my surgeon, who's a renowned surgeon, would say to me, "You can eat all you want now. For the first time in your life, you have no limitations on your diet. Go for pizza, go for French fries, go to McDonald's." It simply was naive. You cannot eat like that when you're compromised, the way you're compromised. That kind of food would make you sick. You can't digest fats. You can't digest a lot of sugar. The hardest things to swallow then and even now, 2 years later, and I'm on somewhat of a normal diet, is meat and bread. I have a hard time not only swallowing but then digesting. So I tend to eat, still softer foods in smaller amounts. So I like what Pat said, because I really think you can learn a lot more from people who have gone through it than you really can from the medical establishment. I don't know any doctor. I've not met a doctor or nurse yet that's had a total gastrectomy. It's a lifestyle change. It's doable. We're all very grateful to be alive to be able to talk about this. And we're also very willing to talk about this to help others, because it was a learning process. We didn't get a lot of help on nutrition, I don't think, from the medical establishment.
Thank you, Nelson, and I think that's a great point, and we appreciate both of you so much for being here and sharing that perspective of your side of the story and what worked for you and what didn't work for you. I have another question from patients that are curious if either of you had any experience or were required tube feeding or TPN at some point during your treatment, and if so, would you mind sharing about that a little bit?
I did not, so maybe Nelson can jump in.
Yeah, as it turned out, I did not either, but there is a story to tell. The particular hospital that I was at did not use a feeding tube. They don't believe in feeding tubes. And that was a judgment call at Sloan Kettering. But had I been at another leading cancer center, MD Anderson in Houston, they absolutely insist on feeding tubes. So within the medical establishment, feeding tubes are controversial. Some are in favor, some are not in favor. The problem with feeding tubes is if you're going to have one, the best time to have one is during the surgery, because if you wait and later find out that you need one, it is a second surgery to have to go back in again, even if they do it laparoscopically to insert what I think they call the J-tube. I, for one, I'm very happy that I didn't have one. I came very close to needing that second surgery because every time I presented to for my appointments at the oncologist, my weight was continuing to go down. And that's when I started the spreadsheet. I was determined to avoid the feeding tube. I felt like it was a gun to my head because people that I talked to that had feeding tubes, and I did a lot of research and talked to a lot of former patients, really didn't like them. There's a lot of maintenance involved. Eventually they tried to stop using them even though the feeding tube was still in, because the doctors tend to leave them in there for a couple of months beyond when you even need them, just as a safety, a safeguard. I looked into TPN very seriously because I thought that might be a solution, and I found out that there are some potentially serious side effects to TPN, and that it was really quite a process. I would call it a last resort. It can work, but it's not comfortable, and it certainly can have some side effects.
Thank you so much, Nelson, for your perspective. And I just want to iterate, of course, and with all of our programs and education, we as an organization are not providing necessarily medical advice and encourage all of our listeners today to go on and do their research. But thank you, Nelson, so much for sharing your perspective and experiences and thoughts about that as a patient. The next question I would like to ask is if either of you used any food supplements or nutrition to deal with any side effects of your treatment.
Well, food supplements, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I did try some, when you say food supplements, I'm not quite sure what you're referring to.
Well, I know you both mentioned protein shakes and things like that supplement, but were there any additional, vitamins or meal replacements or things like that you might have used?
Right. I got on different vitamin kicks when I would read something, unfortunately, and I would experiment with it. However, whenever I talked to my oncologist, I usually got a shrug saying, well, if you think it's helping, great, but I don't see any value in loading up on different type of nutritional supplements for whatever you think is happening. Nelson?
Yes, in my case, when I was on chemo, supplements were absolutely looked down on. They felt that there were not a lot of evidence and a lot of clinical studies that showed the effects of the supplements on the efficacy of the chemo. So in other words, they were concerned about interference of the supplements. So during the chemo phase, there were none, except that my magnesium would run low, very low. I had to have many infusions of magnesium during my chemo. So they would give me magnesium supplements to take orally as well as by the IV. But I did do something else during chemo, which is an alternative form of medicine, not supplements, but I did go through acupuncture, and I had acupuncture 3 times a week when I was in chemo, and I, again, speaking for myself, believe that was very, very helpful because acupuncture really did help to deal with the symptoms. And that's not to say that I didn't take all kinds of anti-nausea medicines because I did. Now, after the chemo was over, I did need some supplements. My vitamin D.
Oh. We may have lost him.
Can you hear me now? I got rid of the phone call.
Yeah.
My vitamin D was low. Can you get me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm back. My vitamin D was low despite the fact that I lived in Florida, and so I'm to this day still on 2,000 IUs of vitamin D, which, as you know, is a very important supplement. And then what happens in a gastrectomy, and I'm not sure about a partial PAT, but the very important energy vitamin known as B12 is actually produced in your stomach. And without one, you're not getting that. So I have to go in monthly for infusions, or not infusions, but injections.
Well, let me add to that, because I don't know what I was thinking of when I first answered the question. I do get a monthly B12 injection. I became anemic through this process, and every 6 or 8 weeks I get an infusion through my chemo port, which I still have, of iron. So again, it's all due to loss of the stomach, which usually used to take care of these issues and absorb these minerals. Now you have to maintain your lab tests to see where you might be deficient. I too recently was told I was low in vitamin D, and have started taking a supplement pill for that.
Thank you both so much, and it sounds like what I heard echoed there is that your physicians were both monitoring those levels for you, and at times it sounded like they were providing the supplements directly to you. And Nelson, thank you for that great explanation about interference and intolerance with your treatments as well. That was very informative. Okay. Unfortunately, we are out of time for more questions today, but I would like to thank both Pat and Nelson for joining us and sharing their experiences with nutritional issues. As you know, this webinar was brought to you by Debbie's Dream Foundation, Curing Stomach Cancer. Thank you to Debbie Zellman, President and Founder, our speakers Pat Campola and Nelson Civello, and to Genentech for providing funding that helped make this webinar possible. As you can see on your screen, we have upcoming events to get involved in and support. Details about these events are available on the Debbie's Dream website at www.debbiesdream.org. Thank you so much again to our speakers and all of our listeners today. Our next nutrition webinar will be held on September 2nd at 12 noon Eastern Time. We would love to hear your thoughts, feedback, and comments before then. Please send your questions and comments to patient.resource@debbiesdream.org. And please stay tuned. Our clinical trials webinar will be starting momentarily.